Right now, somewhere in New Mexico, there is a building that is over 1,000 years old. No air conditioning, no electricity, no cooling system of any kind. And on the hottest day of summer, the inside stays cool. Not just a little cool, noticeably cool, comfortably cool. Scientists measured it. On a day when outside temperatures hit 40 degrees Celsius, the inside of that building was 10 degrees cooler, without a single kilowatt of electricity. That building is still standing today. People still live inside it. And it is made of nothing but mud, water, and straw. So here is the real question. If this technology worked for over 1,000 years, why did we stop using it? And why did a government agency in 1949 pass a rule that made it almost impossible for regular American families to build with it? That is what this video is about. Stay with me, because what happened to Adobe is not just a story about buildings. It is a story about money, power, and a technology so simple and so effective that it made billion-dollar industries nervous. Let us start at the very beginning. Adobe is one of the oldest building materials in human history. We are not talking about a few hundred years. We are talking about thousands of years. In the Middle East, archaeologists have found mud bricks that are 10,000 years old. The ancient city of Ur, in what is now Iraq, was built from adobe around 4,000 years ago. In Egypt, clay brick structures have been found dating back nearly 3,800 years. The word adobe itself traces back to the ancient Egyptian word for mud brick, used around 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. That word traveled from Egyptian into Arabic, then into Spanish, and finally into English. The material traveled the same route, Egypt, to Arabia, to Spain, to the Americas. When Spanish explorers arrived in the American Southwest in the 1500s, they found something that surprised them. The Native Americans were already building with adobe. The Pueblo peoples of the Southwest had been building with mud and straw for centuries before any European arrived. The Spanish brought their own European knowledge of adobe construction and combined it with what indigenous builders already knew. The result was the adobe architecture we still see in New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of California today. So adobe is not a primitive technology. It is a technology that emerged independently on multiple continents across thousands of years of human history. Different cultures, different climates, different centuries. All of them arrived at the same answer: earth and straw and sun. That tells you something important. When a technology appears independently in ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Peru, and the pre-Columbian American Southwest, it is not a coincidence. It is a solution, a real, effective, proven solution. Now let me explain what makes adobe actually work. Adobe is simple. You take local soil, mix it with water and a little straw, pour it into a mold, and let it dry in the sun. That is it. No factory, no kiln, no industrial process, no supply chain, just earth and sunlight. The walls you build with adobe are thick, very thick. Traditional adobe walls are typically 50 to 70 centimeters thick. That is almost 2 feet of solid earth between you and the outside world. And that thickness is the entire secret. Thick walls made of earth do something that modern thin walls simply cannot match. They absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night. Scientists call this thermal mass. Think of it like a battery, but instead of storing electricity, it stores temperature. The wall charges up with heat all day while the sun is blazing outside. But the heat moves through 2 feet of solid earth, very, very slowly. By the time that heat makes it through to the inside of your home, it is nighttime. The air outside has already cooled down. And now the wall works in reverse, pushing that stored heat back out into the cool night air. The result is a natural temperature delay. When outside temperatures spike in the afternoon, you barely feel it inside. When the night cools down, the wall slowly releases its stored heat, and the inside stays comfortable. This smoothing effect is exactly what mechanical air conditioning tries to do. An AC unit fights against the heat that pours in through your thin modern walls. Adobe walls simply slow that heat down so dramatically that it never becomes a problem in the first place. Scientists have run direct comparisons between adobe homes and modern homes, built with wood frames, drywall, and engineered insulation. The results are consistent. Adobe buildings achieved comfortable indoor temperatures in summer with no energy supply at all. Modern homes built with standard materials in the same outdoor conditions could not do the same without running mechanical cooling. Let that sink in for a moment. A wall made of mud and straw outperforms a modern engineered home when it comes to natural cooling. Not by a little, by the difference between needing air conditioning and not needing it at all. Now let me bring this to life with a real example. There is a building in northern New Mexico called Taos Pueblo. It is a 5-story adobe structure. Researchers believe the main buildings were constructed somewhere between the year 1000 and 1450. The oldest parts of the structure have been standing for over 1,000 years. Taos Pueblo is the oldest continuously inhabited community in the United States. Not the oldest ruins, not the oldest archaeological site, the oldest place where people have been living continuously, without interruption, for over 1,000 years. UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site. The same list includes the Acropolis in Greece, Stonehenge in England, and the Taj Mahal in India, the world's most significant historical and cultural landmarks. And here is something that should make every American stop and think. The people who live in Taos Pueblo today have made a deliberate choice to maintain no electricity and no running water inside the ancient walls. Not because they cannot afford it, not because they are unaware of modern technology, because they understand what those walls already provide. Every year, the community comes together to replaster the outside of the buildings with fresh Adobe mud, the same way their ancestors did it 1,000 years ago. The walls stay strong, the interior stays comfortable, and the building keeps standing. 1,000 years. The same building, the same material, still working. Now think about your own home for a moment. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the average American household paid around $144 per month on electricity in 2024. That adds up to over $1,700 every single year. And here is the part that matters most. Heating and cooling account for about 52% of that total energy consumption. Air conditioning alone is the single biggest electricity draw in most American homes during summer months. So a typical American family is spending roughly $900 every year just to stay comfortable in their own home. Every year, year after year, for decades. According to the EIA, the national average residential electricity rate rose to 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour in 2024, up from 16.0 cents the year before, and it has been climbing every year. The year before that it was lower. The trend never goes the other direction. The people living in Taos Pueblo for 1,000 years paid exactly $0 on cooling costs. The earth did the work for free. So how did we go from that to this? The answer starts in the late 1800s with the Industrial Revolution. When factories began producing concrete, steel, and fired bricks at massive industrial scale, everything about construction changed. Suddenly you could order a truckload of concrete blocks and have them delivered to your building site faster than you could dig, mix, mold, and sun-dry Adobe bricks. Speed became the priority. Factories had to run. Supply chains had to justify themselves. Investors needed returns. Adobe is slow. The bricks need 10 to 14 days of sun to properly dry and cure. The walls need skilled hands to apply correctly. Adobe cannot be mass-produced in a factory and shipped across the country on a rail line. Concrete could. Lumber could. And so the building industry shifted. Not because Adobe stopped working. It never stopped working. The shift happened because concrete and lumber fit the pace and profit structure of an industrial economy in ways that Adobe simply could not. By the early 20th century, Adobe was still common in the American Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of California. The dry climate was perfect for it. The tradition was still alive. But even there, modern materials were slowly pushing it aside as cities grew and urban housing demand increased. Then came 1949, and everything changed. That year, the Federal Housing Administration established a rule that would quietly reshape American construction for generations. The rule was simple, and it was brutal. Any home not built primarily from lumber or concrete was ineligible for FHA-backed mortgage financing. Think about what that actually meant. In 1949, the FHA backed a huge portion of American home mortgages. This was the post-war era. Millions of American families were trying to buy homes for the first time. The GI Bill was in effect. The American dream of homeownership was front and center. And for almost all of those families, a government-backed mortgage was the only realistic path to owning a home. If your home was made of Adobe, you could not get that mortgage. Not eligible. End of conversation. Wealthy Americans who could pay cash were not affected. But the middle class, the working class, the veteran coming home from the war who wanted to build a home in New Mexico the same way his grandfather had, he was locked out. The FHA rule made Adobe construction economically impossible for ordinary American families. A single bureaucratic decision wiped out a building tradition that had served humanity for thousands of years. But the story does not end in 1949. In 1970, the Uniform Building Code added a new provision specifically targeting Adobe construction. The provision required that any Adobe structure include steel reinforcement and cement throughout, not just in earthquake-prone regions, not just for certain building types, across the board. In every climate, every application. This rule did two devastating things at the same time. First, it made Adobe dramatically more expensive. If you have to add steel rebar and cement to an Adobe wall, you are no longer building with low-cost local earth. You are building a hybrid structure that costs close to what a conventional home costs, but takes more time and skill to assemble. Second, and this is the part that should make you genuinely angry, the steel and cement reinforcement destroyed the very thermal properties that made Adobe effective. Adding dense industrial materials throughout an Adobe wall changes how heat moves through it. The thermal mass effect that had been keeping homes cool for 10,000 years was degraded by the material that the code now required to be inside every Adobe wall. The rule made Adobe more expensive to build with and less effective at what it does best. Both at the same time. And here is the detail that makes this history stick with you. The Portland Cement Association wrote that provision. The Portland Cement Association is the lobbying organization that represents cement manufacturers across the United States. It had been lobbying for building codes that required cement for years before 1970. And when the Uniform Building Code added the Adobe provision that year, it was the Portland Cement Association's language that went in. Multiple historical accounts trace that provision directly back to the cement industry's own lobbying language. The organization that profits from selling cement helped write the rule that made it effectively illegal to build Adobe without cement. Now let us be fair and honest here, because accuracy matters. Adobe does have real limitations. It is not the right material for every climate or every situation. In areas with heavy rainfall, Adobe walls need to be carefully protected from water erosion. In regions with frequent large earthquakes, earthen structures require thoughtful engineering. These are legitimate concerns, and builders working with Adobe need to take them seriously. But the sweeping building code requirements that were imposed did not make targeted, sensible accommodations for these real risks in specific high-risk regions. They applied expensive, across-the-board requirements to all Adobe construction everywhere, including the dry Southwest, where Adobe had proven itself for 1,000 years without any of those issues. And those requirements were written by the industry that stood to gain the most from Adobe's decline. The result was entirely predictable. Adobe construction collapsed in mainstream American buildings. Concrete and lumber filled every corner of the market, and the American housing stock became almost entirely dependent on mechanical heating and cooling systems to stay livable. For the builders and material companies, this was excellent. More concrete sold, more lumber sold, and every house built without adequate thermal mass needed an air conditioning system, which meant more AC units sold, more electricity consumed, more money flowing from American families to utility companies, equipment manufacturers, and energy producers. For American homeowners, the math worked out differently. Every month, they paid a heating and cooling bill that Adobe walls would have made significantly smaller or even unnecessary. Year after year, decade after decade. Meanwhile, in the Adobe homes that survived in the Southwest, a different story was playing out. Homeowners who lived in genuine thick-wall Adobe reported dramatically lower cooling costs. The walls did the work. The temperature stayed stable. The electricity bill stayed comparatively low. And those homes stayed comfortable through summer heat that would drive anyone out of a standard frame house without air conditioning. Researchers who have studied traditional earthen buildings in hot, dry climates consistently find the same pattern. Adobe and similar earthen construction outperform modern materials for natural cooling in arid climates. The thermal mass does what insulation cannot fully replicate, because the physics are fundamentally different. Insulation slows heat transfer. Thermal mass stores heat and delays its movement. In the right climate, storage and delay beat resistance every time. And now something interesting is starting to happen. Published research on earth construction techniques has increased tenfold over the past decade. Architects and engineers in the Southwest are experimenting with modern approaches to Adobe that try to preserve the thermal properties while meeting contemporary building requirements. Some builders are finding ways to incorporate thermal mass principles into modern construction using a combination of materials. Passive cooling design, which is essentially the same principle Adobe has used for thousands of years, is becoming a serious topic in architecture and engineering schools. Ancient technology is not dead. It is being rediscovered. Because the math has not changed. Hot summers are getting hotter. Electricity costs are rising. And there are still buildings made of mud and straw that stay cool without spending a dollar. Let me bring this full circle for you. 10,000 years ago, someone in the ancient Middle East discovered that thick walls made from earth and water could regulate temperature naturally. That discovery spread across the ancient world. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Spain, the Americas. Every great desert civilization landed on the same answer because it worked. 1,000 years ago, the people of Taos Pueblo built a home using that same principle. That home is still standing today. People still live in it today. Without air conditioning. Without an electricity bill, without any mechanical cooling system at all. Then came industrial manufacturing, then a government financing rule in 1949, then a building code provision written by a cement lobby in 1970. And in the space of about 30 years, a technology that had served humanity for 10,000 years was effectively removed from the American mainstream. Today, the average American pays over $1,700 a year in electricity. More than half of that goes to heating and cooling. That number has gone up every single year. The trend never reverses. We did not abandon Adobe because it stopped working. We abandoned it because it was slow to produce and did not fit industrial supply chains. And then a government rule locked ordinary families out of it. And then a lobbying organization helped write a building code that made it unaffordable and less effective at the same time. The technology worked. The system changed. And we have all been paying for that change month after month on our electricity bills for decades. This is the pattern that keeps showing up in this channel's research. A simple, ancient technology solves a problem effectively and affordably. Modern industry offers an alternative that is faster to produce and more profitable to sell. The original technology gets pushed aside, and we all spend the rest of our lives paying for the replacement. Adobe is one example, but it is not the only one. There is another technology from roughly the same period of American history. Just as simple, just as effective at keeping homes cool without electricity. It was widely used, and it disappeared even faster than Adobe did. And the story of how it disappeared involves a single corporate decision that affected every American home for the next 100 years. That is the next video. If this one made you think differently about the walls of your home, that one will change how you think about the air inside it. Make sure you are subscribed, because that story is one most people have never heard, and once you hear it, you will not be able to look at your thermostat the same way again.